Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session Why Risk Management Techniques Are Important in Ethical Hacking. I'm Richa, and I'll be your host for the day. Our speaker for the session today is Irene Corpus, co founder of Women in Cybersecurity. Please note the session will be in listen only mode and will last for 50 minutes, out of which 10 minutes will be dedicated to Q&A. Requesting all the participants to post your questions in the Q&A window. Should you need any assistance during the session, please let us know in the chat box. Also, we do have two criteria for certification. Participant needs to attend the complete webinar. Second, fill in the survey and write the answer to the three MCQ questions based on the webinar, which will be sent to you one day post the webinar. A quick update to all the women attendees as we celebrate Women's History Month. EC Council is happy to announce that our women attendee can gain access to an exclusive CodeRed box bundle designed by global women leader Dr. Anuradha Rao, founder of Cyber Cognizant, and Lisa, CISSP certified instructor for the United States Air Force, which will be releasing soon. To do so, please make sure that you attend the full webinar and fill in the survey. About our speaker, Irene has more than 30 years of combined experience in IT operation, information security, and government risk and compliance, project management, quality and excellence models, and ISO audit. She worked at a Swiss-based multinational company for 17 years and is currently based in Abu Dhabi for most of her work in the UAE-related information security strategy, development, managing the Security Operations Center, vendor management, and implementing and auditing according to security standards. Irene is also a co-founder of the Women in Cybersecurity Middle East and is heavily engaged in its activities supporting women and girls in their professional growth. She has received several accolades, including the Middle East Top 30 CISOs, Middle East Security Awards Women Executive, the 100 Most Influential Filipinas in the World, Most Innovative Security Project London, the Filipino Times IT Professional of the Year, and the Stevie Award Women in Cyber Security Award, New York. So without any further delay, I would now hand over the session to you, Reem.
Thank you, Richa, for the very warm introduction. I also want to thank EC Council for giving me this opportunity to speak at the Cyber Talks, to share what I have learned in my years of experience in one of the fields of information security, and that is information security risk management. Likewise, I also would like to thank everyone for your interest in this webinar. And thank you for all of you who have participated in the online quizzes and that our colleagues as well in the EC Council who posted those quizzes via LinkedIn. I will do my best to deliver and share as much knowledge as within the allocated period. It's 40 minutes, I believe. Our webinar is entitled Why Risk Management Techniques Are Essential in Ethical Hacking. In this webinar, I also hope to give as a takeaway, like a career path or advice on how ethical hackers, those who are doing the VAPT, can look at the information security risk manager or information security risk auditor as a possible management or career direction. Of course, if you are, let's say, a hardcore ethical hacker, you can also go into the direction of becoming a SOC manager or SOC director. But this is not the context of this webinar today. In this webinar, we will discuss first about the enterprise risk management, how it comes as a vital part of the organization, understanding how the cascaded corporate strategy would require a risk department, what are the department's goals, and how they support the strategy as a whole. Next, the cyber risk assessment, cybersecurity risk assessment. What is the difference between cybersecurity risk assessment and the risk assessment that other departments would normally do? Third, why a risk management techniques are essential in ethical hacking. We may say they are essential to know or they are essential to map and work in parallel or side by side. Here, we will also understand and try to bridge the gap between the ethical hackers or the VAPT team, their objectives, and the IS risk management objective. Sometimes, if they don't meet in the same language, there is like a difference between what the pen testers would understand of their task and the risk managers would not understand or meet what the VAPT, the pen testers are doing. Lastly, I will briefly show a risk register. I'll show you how it works as a tool for the risk managers in monitoring and reviewing the risk. So we will proceed now. First is the enterprise risk management. Let us define what is a risk. A risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives. And we say objectives, we mean strategic objectives. Second, risk can be a deviation of what against what is expected. They could be positive or negative deviations. And yes, not all risks are negative. There are also positive risks. For example, with the fourth industrial revolution and the fact that we are now actually moving to the fifth industrial revolution, embracing the challenge to meet the demands in the industry, the businesses are increasingly searching for new ways to incorporate technology for greater efficiency. Let's say digital transformation. The example of this are enabling chatbots and the phone banking, for example. However, more organizations also realize that with such investment in innovation, there may be a need to eliminate some jobs within the company. Redundancy, for the employees, this is a risk of losing jobs, which is a negative development. But for the enterprise, the significant savings in the wages plus the improvement in efficiency and consistency, this is a positive result. So this is why we say a deviation can be a positive or negative. Of course, greater efficiency means higher customer satisfaction. Higher customer satisfaction means attracting more customers, and so on. It's a spiraling effect. Third, a risk is expressed in terms of a combination of the consequences of an event or vulnerability and the associated likelihood or occurrence. Therefore, risk equals impact or the consequences times the likelihood or the probability. Again, risk equals impact times probability. ERM or enterprise risk management is an ongoing process. It is designed to manage all risk. It is not a one-time exercise. It involves cooperation and participation of the key stakeholders in the organization, as well as some individuals who can represent their specific departments as a risk management team. It is important to establish an ERM framework because it enables the firm to gain a clearer view of the overall risk level. An effective ERM framework will establish common language around the risk. It means we talk in the same language. Next, it provides a clear definition of the roles and responsibilities. It establishes a clear ERM methodology. It means you don't do your risk assessment according to how you want it. And then the other person would also do their risk assessment according to how they believe it should be done. It is understanding and establishing a clear ERM methodology. Risk appetite, agree on the risk appetite. This basically is agreed with the management or the board. A risk appetite is an articulation of the tolerance level for risk that an organization is prepared to accept as they execute their strategic and business objectives. There are other benefits of establishing an ERM. Some of them are to improve the deployment of a capital, break down the silos between various departments, improve transparency, promote a culture of risk awareness, and there are other more. The ISO 31000 is the ISO standard for risk management. It has guidelines, it provides principles, has a framework, and a process for managing the risk. It can be used by any organization regardless of its size, activity, or sector. Specifically, the clause number 5 of ISO 31000 talks about the framework. It is the leadership and commitment. You see that there are the integration, the design, implementation, evaluation, and improvement. Like any ISO standards, it applies the PDCA, the plan, do, check, and act, the Deming, the very famous Deming cycle. So it's the same as the ISO 31000. You also do a plan of your risk assessment or risk management. You check it, plan, you do it, implement it. You check after you do a risk assessment. It doesn't stop there. You continuously check it. And then there's a continuous cycle of evaluation. Now, what is a cyber risk assessment? It's just one of the activities that you do when you are involved in risk management. A risk assessment, a cyber risk assessment, is the process of identifying, analyzing, and evaluating risks. It helps to ensure that the cybersecurity controls you chose are appropriate to the risk your organization faces. Here it means you have controls in place, already in place. You have a cybersecurity control that you'd like to assess whether they are still effective. Where there is an enterprise risk division responsible for managing the enterprise's risk, the IT division who manages the IT-related risk would have to be integrated. Do you remember the last slide or the last part discussion in the previous slide? I mentioned about the ERM framework, and one of the areas there is about integration. So the setup varies actually from organization to organization. But where there is no enterprise risk division, some mature IT divisions establish their own GRC, or governance, risk, and compliance. This is where they would hire a GRC manager or GRC director. There are several reasons why you need to also to do a risk assessment. It's you have to it contributes to reduction of long-term costs. VAPT, vulnerability assessment and pen testing. Of course, if you can identify the potential threats and vulnerabilities, then working on mitigating them can prevent or reduce the security incident. The cyber risk assessment also provides a better organizational knowledge, understanding where your organizational stands and how to improve your security posture. It can avoid data breaches. It can avoid regulatory issues. Customer data that is stolen because you failed to comply with HIPAA, PCI DSS, or GDPR. Can cause some regulatory issues to you. So that is some of the importance of cybersecurity risk assessment. Cyber risks pose a threat to your organization's data assets, CIA, or confidentiality, integrity, and availability. I would assume that most of us here already are familiar with the CIA. The confidentiality means you need to protect the data residing in your system. It means at rest. In transit, these are the ones, for example, bank remittances or payments on e-commerce websites such as eBay or Amazon, or data which is in process, filing of online forms, the students' application in the universities. Processing of data here, it means they are live, they are in process. So you need to protect the data from unauthorized use, unauthorized access, or unauthorized interception. The second part of the triad is the integrity. You should detect any alteration in the data, whether, again, it is at rest, in transit, or in process. The last part that you need to secure or be careful of the threats is the availability. High availability, redundancy, reliability, acceptable response time, of course, availability only to authorized user. This is where the access management come in. And based on your risk appetite, we mentioned about the risk appetite earlier, how much reputational damage are you willing to accept? I don't know if you noticed a few days back, the social media, Facebook, Twitter, IG, including Instagram, I think, experienced an outage. The posting of the messages are delayed, but they were able to resume normal operations within 24 hours. Did this heavily impact or give them a reputational damage? Maybe not, but if you think that that particular outage is being caused by a breach or attack by the hackers, then this is a bigger reputational damage or a concern to the users. Ethical hackers are aware that their role is vital in proactively addressing the risks brought by the vulnerabilities in the organization. And therefore, it is much better to understand how ethical hackers could be merged with the level of managing according to ERM, or your enterprise risk management, or your enterprise risk framework or guidelines. Enterprise risk management, let's look at the top down and bottom up of it. Corporate strategy. This is the organization's strategy. It defines its aspirations, its goals, business objectives. Within those objectives are projects or initiatives that will be executed to achieve the goals. The corporate strategies typically range in 5 years. Corporate strategy is cascaded to every department. Each of the departments would own one or more of the objectives within the corporate strategy. The enterprise risk division's primary function is the ERM, which is designed to identify potential events that may affect the entity, and they manage the risk to be within the risk appetite to provide a reasonable assurance regarding the achievement of entity objectives. The ER division would develop the risk policy, the procedures, the framework, the guidelines, and they also cascade this as well, of course, to the department to have a unified approach in the risk management. Note here as well that I don't mean that the corporate strategy is only cascaded to the risk division, okay? Just to clarify. Now, once the enterprise risk management or the framework has been established, the risks within for the whole organization have been identified. That is also cascaded to every department. In this, for the purpose of this discussion, I'm only showing the IT department, of course. So cascading the enterprise risk framework, the departments will develop their own risk registers, their own policy, for example, information security policy for the IT department. The IT departments also typically would have various units like application development, network and infrastructure, InfoSec, or this is where you see the SOC team, Security Operations Center. You have threat intelligence team, you have forensic team, etc. Sometimes bigger IT departments would have their own IT project management team. And of course, IT operations or help desk is always present. IT security is where typically the GRC function resides. Again, GRC is governance, risk, and compliance. So in terms of governance, there should be, again, the security policy. I also mentioned here that cybersecurity assessment and VAPT, but there are other related documents that should exist. It's not only limited to this. You would have a better, you should be able to manage the risk better if you understand your organization's strategy, the objectives that you own, and to which goals do they align. The reason why a strategy is cascaded from the corporate down to the department is so that when you do something, you know that you are contributing to the achievement of your organization's strategy. So for example, in the case of the IT department, if the organization is, let's say, an banking or a finance industry, there are certain regulatory requirements like the PCI DSS. If you are a healthcare industry, then you have the HIPAA, or the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. In Europe, there is the GDPR. So you also have to check what are you implementing internally. ISO 27001, for example, it's the information security management system. So the ethical hackers would need to understand or at least be aware of this and have a better alignment on the level of security required for the information assets. As they also mature, I mean the ethical hackers, as they mature in understanding this relationship, they will be able to provide an input on which systems, applications, or hardware devices would need a more periodic VAPT. So as the corporate strategy is cascaded from top to bottom of the different departments, their operational performance actually feed up to the corporate level. There are the operational plans, you have the services, you have the projects, and there's also, of course, performance management or KPI associated with it. Strategic planning is always has a periodic performance management. So in summary on this slide, in terms of the ERM, what I would like to illustrate in this diagram is that the ER division understands the organization's goals, objectives, and from there, they determine the risk level to which is acceptable to the organization. They could develop their own risk in terms of the other department, and they can develop their own risk methodology because again, for example, the environmental health and safety department risk management process is different from how we do it in the IT department. IT department, on the other hand, also understand the organization's strategic goal and therefore align and support the ERM. Now, performing a cyber risk assessment. In performing a cyber risk assessment, at least you would have to answer the what, the how, and the who, or answer what, how, and who. What do you hold for your stakeholders and customers? What, as an individual, for me, I wouldn't want any of my personal information or records to be compromised, even it is as small as a parking ticket, record of my parking ticket, or up to my banking or financial information, my health records, my driver's license, or my records of purchases online or on site. Remember the C in the CIA, right? You can also ask what infrastructure do you have? Do you have it on-prem or on cloud? What is the value of the information that you keep? Perhaps it is difficult to quantify the value. Maybe the better question would be, what is the equivalent value of the information to you as an organization when the data are compromised and exposed? Sometimes it is the regulations that would dictate the fines, like in the EU. The GDPR sets a maximum fine of 20 million euro or 4% of the annual global turnover or whichever is greater. However, not all GDPR infringements lead to data protection fines. Another example is the Uber company, which was later ordered to pay 148 million in its breach settlement. So the question of what is the value of information that you keep, it may be difficult to value or quantify, but you can convert that to the loss that your company would have if you are breached, if you suffer a breach. Next question is the how. How do you protect your data assets? Do you do data classification, like you label the data as confidential, restricted, or public? Do you apply encryption? How do you store your data? Is it on the prem or on the cloud? How long do you keep your data? You have an archiving policy, right? Even your archives, where do you intend to keep them? Next is the who. Who is about asking who has access to your data. Definitely the owners of the data will have their access to their own data. But other than them, who else can manage the access. This is the internal now, your resources, and this is where the access management come in. There is also a question of when. On this third part, I also want as a risk manager, I also want to ask the when question. When the administrators are on leave, do they still, those who are responsible for access management, do they still have access? And with regards to the where, another question that I'd like to put here is the where. I know one organization that their security in their staff device, laptop, I'd say is so strict that once they go outside the country, the, the location being set on, it will disable their access to the servers. Their VPNs won't work, and therefore, from here, I also want to answer the why. Why would you need to disable or revoke the access? Revoke the access when the employee leaves the country? Is it because of the risk appetite? Is it that the company is not willing to lose or pay a double digit or triple digit $1 million in fine? So this is how you do a risk assessment. There's always a question, a spiraling question. Every time you look at a certain control which is in place, you also verify the consequences, if it is in place or if it is not working. Now, let's talk about the VAPT and ethical hackers. So VAPT, or vulnerability assessment and pen testing, is about defending your network before the bad guys explore your vulnerabilities. Hacking is not a matter of if, but when. The sole purpose is finding the vulnerabilities in your network. You defend your network by doing the same thing as the bad guys do, but of course without the fear of getting into jail. It means you act to defeat the hackers. You think and you act like a hacker. It is also to evaluate the security posture, how the system or infrastructure are hardened, what are their vulnerabilities. During the VAPT, the ethical hackers find and attempt to exploit any vulnerabilities to determine whether unauthorized access or other malicious activities are possible. Some organizations, it is possible that they will only request for a VA, a vulnerability assessment, without the pen testing. If the VA report shows critical or high vulnerabilities, then they may opt, or they may decide to proceed with the pen testing, but only pen testing on the vulnerabilities that are critical and high. VAPT is increasingly important to organizations wanting to achieve compliance with standards, including the GDPR, the ISO 27001, which is an example, PCI DSS, or HIPAA. To some entities, it is not optional, but rather mandatory. So for them to comply with this regulatory requirement, they also do the VAPT. This is also mostly the function of the GRC. They incorporate the VAPT as one of the annual initiatives or projects that feed into either as a certification agenda or to support their annual surveillance ISO audit. The ISO are valid for 3 years. So once you get the certification, the following year you'll have a surveillance audit. So those who have the ISO 27001, sometimes they incorporate the VAPT as part of that certification. So ethical hackers' scope of work is defined or governed by the rules of engagement. This is a document issued to authorized ethical hackers or the parties involved that the management is aware of their activities. Again, as I have mentioned earlier, once an ethical hacker has a better understanding of the organization's strategy, and they know the risk appetite of their company, the information assets that are of most value to organization are and the clients, the ethical hackers, they may be able to contribute or suggest which systems, applications, or devices will need to be included in the scope of work. So we see here the ethical hackers not just simply pen testers or doing the hacking. We treat them, we have to escalate their level of participation and role in the organization such that we see them as strategic partners, not only technical or ethical hackers. I'd like to here map the risk assessment with the VAPT. On the what are your crown jewels? This is the first step that the ethical hackers will do. Since the ROE, or the rules of engagement, defines the systems, database, application, hardware, devices that they will do a VAPT on, this is already like a targeted attack. It is the first step of hacking. So it is also called footprinting and information gathering phase. It is the preparatory phase where we collect as much information as possible about the target. Here is where you usually collect information about the network or the host. So you do port scanning, vulnerability scanning, network mapping. There are different tools. And footprinting, there are also two types of footprinting. It could be active, where the ethical hackers would directly interact with the target to gather information about it using different tools and map, for example. And there's also the passive footprinting, which is social engineering. You're trying to collect information about the target without directly accessing the target. This involves collecting information from social media or public websites. The next is the how. When I, as a risk manager, I'm doing risk assessment, in my how phase, the ethical hackers are actually in the stage of gaining access or on the phase of gaining access. This is where the attacker breaks into the system or the network. They use various tools or methods, and after entering into a system, they can increase their privilege to administrator level, and they can install application or modify data or hide data. They will do their everything to test to what extent they can do with the level of access that they have. And once they have escalated their privilege, let's say to administrator, they can already do a lateral transfer. The who. Now, once they have accessed the system, they have penetrated the organization, the pen testers, or I mean the ethical hackers, they will try to maintain their access as much as they can. The hacker may just hack the system to show it was vulnerable, or he can be so playful to cause more trouble, but still within the scope of the ROE, or the rules of engagement. He may want to maintain his presence as much as he can. He can do persistent attack in the background without the knowledge of the user or the organization itself. This can be done by using Trojans or rootkits or other malicious files. The aim is to maintain access until you finish the task that you plan to accomplish in the target. So as the VAPT is happening, part of my risk assessment is also to determine the effectiveness of the security controls that are in place. For example, do I have a SIEM, security incident and event management? Did the SIEM detect the scanning? Am I notified when the ethical hackers are doing the scanning? If they planted malicious files, did I get a trigger on my anti-malware software? If not, it is not because, maybe it is not because my anti-malware software is not working, but it could be that there is a missing parameter or setting, and therefore the malware was not detected. If it is a wrong configuration or misconfiguration, then I will have to drill down to the next possible vulnerability, which is the administrator. Is the administrator properly trained? And I will not stop to determine as much vulnerabilities as I can as a result of the ethical hackers' VAPT activity. Clearing the trust. tracks. No thief want to be caught, of course. An intelligent hacker always clears all evidences, and it's part of the phases of VAPT. You do not leave any open ports after the VAPT, otherwise you are compromising or allowing the possible attack on your system just because of you forgetting to close the ports. This in clearing tasks also clearing tracks also involves modifying, deleting the values on the logs, modifying the registry values, or uninstalling all applications that you used in the folders that you created. Here on this next slide, I would like to further map the risk management steps to that of the VAPT. Activities that the ethical hackers do. I identify the risk. You determine the vulnerabilities. I analyze the risk. You observe what is happening once you get into the system. I evaluate the risk, high, medium, or low. You give me a proof of concept. I do a risk treatment. Risk treatment is mitigate, accept the transfer, and you provide a recommendation. I review and monitor, and then you do the next cycle VAPT. Sorry. And this is an example of a VAPT report. So you have the vulnerability, you have observation, a proof of concept screenshot here. I'm showing to you an example of a security breach, the case study of Uber. So in 2016, the Uber was hacked, but they only admitted it 1 year after. 57 million customer driver record and driver licenses were hacked. Uber did not follow the protocol. They did not inform the authorities and the impacted users. And then they paid the hackers $100,000 just to keep quiet and delete the stolen data. Let us analyze this case. First, the hackers. How did this happen? The hackers gained access to the Amazon web owned by the Uber. They found credentials used by the Uber software engineers. The hackers, using the credentials, they discovered an archive of the riders and driver information. And then they emailed Uber asking money. Well, this is according to the company. So what happened here? Where are the vulnerabilities? If I did a VAPT, I could have been informed by my ethical hacker that my infrastructure doesn't have enough secure perimeter defense. When I do a VAPT, my ethical hackers could have informed me that there are credentials lying out there. Humans are still the weakest link, right? If I did a VAPT, they could have seen that there are data that are not supposed to be in there because they are archived and they are not encrypted in the first place. Here is something that had brought a reputational damage to the organization. Of course, they are asked to pay. They paid $100,000 to the hackers, and they are also penalized $148 million for this. In addition, they also agreed to 20 years of privacy audit in settlement with the FTC. This is the Federal Trade Commission for the breach settlement. Now, risk register, and by the way, that is a very interesting case. Here, the risk register. Risk register is one of the tools that it should be there. For me, it is a must that you have a risk register. It is where you keep the results, not only of the VAPT, but the other risks that come out of doing a cybersecurity risk assessment according to the standards that you may be implementing. Again, if I am using ISO 27001, VAPT is just one of my tools, strategic tools as well, and partner the ethical hackers as a strategic partner in maintaining or ensuring that the controls are in place. So a risk register are utility among many cybersecurity professionals that allow practitioners to track and measure the risks in one place. Optimally, Your risk register should be used to create an inventory of potentially adverse events, the likelihood, the impact, and the description. So I will be ending my presentation here, but I will show you briefly an example of risk register that I used. It is only an Excel file using macro, pivot tables, etc. Let me exit this, please. So I hope you're seeing my screen. These are random entries, okay? So if you will see that there is a threat and the vulnerability is not aligned to that, just ignore it, please. This is just for the purpose of demonstration. But to begin with, a risk register should have these terms and definition. This come from your risk division, the enterprise risk division. Here, there is an agreed language or matrix. What is classified as critical risk level? There are the definitions and examples here. From the critical, high, medium, minor, and low, there is the definition of the impact level. When do you say it is catastrophic, major, moderate, minor, and low? There is a definition of the likelihood level. Almost certain is 5. It means it can possibly, can certainly, certain to occur, up to low, number 1, or highly unlikely, 1 is the number. You define the proximity. Risk may occur within 1 month, therefore proximity, how close will the risk can possibly happen? It is 5 or very distant and 1. Other terms and definitions are here. And I hope you recall I mentioned earlier that risk is about impact times probability. So based on this definition, as you can see, there are numbers here, correct? You have 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You map them here. So a low impact with low probability is a low risk, while a catastrophic or a 5 with a probability that almost certain has the critical risk level or 25. That's how you will map it. Controls mapping, I also would like to share this with you because, I'm sorry, the control mapping, if you are implementing multiple standards in your organization, it would be a good practice for you to just map the controls so that you have a wider view of what you are missing or highly prioritizing. So again, risk register is here. I can play around with this for the purpose of just showing to you if it is the impact is low and the likelihood is low, it means my risk score is also low. So it is calculated. There are macros in here that you can see, and there are some formulas. So my first step is identify the assets. Second is identify the threat vulnerabilities, and the VAPT reports are input here. Third is I identify the impact, likelihood, and the risk score. And then fourth, identify the proximity, also the risk owner, the risk treatment, and plant controls. And then the fifth is I identify the impact, likelihood, and risk score after implementing the controls. It means this is the review and you can do a VAPT again if you have to. I also included here the standard that I am monitoring on or mapping the risk assessment with. Other ways of utilizing this, for example, you may want to look or prioritize only the risks that are critical. It means these are my priority. I need the critical ones to be resolved or mitigated within 1 month. But I would say that those who have low, I can give you 6 months to resolve them. So this again is a tool that is very useful for risk managers. This is where the pen testers or the ethical hackers would see their value in the risk management process. My tool can also, I can do some pivoting here. So, sorry. So, for example, I can look at the assets, or here you can use the pivot table to focus on who has what or which doesn't have what is the necessary. Yep. So basically, this is my presentation. I hope you find it very informative, and I hope I'm able to partake with you some of the key learnings that have progressed in the years of being involved in this type of work. So I shall bring back to you the stage now, Richa.
Thank you so much, Irene, for an insightful and informative session. I hope all the audience have enjoyed the amazing presentation. A quick reminder to all our women attendees today, don't forget to fill out the survey after this session to gain access to an exclusive CodeRed box bundle designed by global women leaders Dr. Anuradha Rao, founder of Cyber COSNAC, and Lisa, CISP certified instructor for the United States Air Force, which will be releasing soon. This is our gift to you as we celebrate Women History Month. EC Council University has announced a President's Scholarship for Women in Cybersecurity, a dedicated women oriented program assisting a new and current women undergraduates and graduate with tuition assistance worth 2,500 USD to reach their future endeavors. More information about this is in our chat window. So today's session is synced with the EC Council Certified Ethical Hacking course. EC Council CEH, which maps to many ethical hacking roles in industry like security analysis, information security analyst, certified ethical hacker, security consultant, site administrator, and network management executive. Anyone with CEH certification is eligible for 18,000 plus numbers of immediate job openings with an average salary of 90,000 USD to 11,000 per annum. Let us know your preferred mode of training through the poll, which is live now, and we will reach out to you. Now, we will take the questions for Irene, which has been sent across in the Q&A window. So the first question, Irene, we have is, what are the risks when our servers are stable in inside zone?
I'm sorry, what are the risks when our servers are stable and
Inside zone.
inside or inside?
It's inside zone. I'll just repeat
Okay.
it again. What
Yeah,
are the
I'm
risks?
sorry. When do you, I'm sorry, I would be honest. What do you mean by inside zone?
Yes, this is a question
Or
as
DNC,
has been
behind the
asked
DNC?
by inside zone. Okay,
Okay, we can
Okay,
move
I'll
to the
talk.
next
I may
question,
not
I think.
understand.
Yes, yes,
I may not understand what inside zone mean, but if
right.
you say your servers are stable, again, there are always security controls. Don't be complacent. Don't be comfortable that your server is stable. Being stable doesn't mean that it is safe. There are a lot of perimeter server hardening that you need to make sure that are in place, and there are three layers of protection or security that you have to look into. It is not only about installing a firewall. It's not, of course, the firewall have to be properly configured. That is the first line. The second line is when you are inside the perimeter already. Even your servers, if you say they are stable, again, you have insider threats that you have to consider as well. Sometimes internal resources, their mistakes or their errors or their non-compliance with the policy, it could pose threat to your servers. So end users, they may not be following the proper policy. Add to that, of course, end users expect that. But on the administrator level or on the developer levels, for example, the developers, they need to have or at least follow the OWASP protocol when developing applications. So when you say your servers are stable, but you have an application residing on that server which has a lot of vulnerabilities, how would you equate that then? I also would like to say that you shouldn't stop looking or spiraling from one vulnerability to another. You should always look at what could possibly happen. It is not if it will happen, but if it is when it will happen. That's why risk assessment is very important. And to me, I always see that the having a complete inventory of your assets is very important. Having a list, regardless of how long that is, regardless of how small or critical the risk could be, put them all in your risk register. A stable server is not a standalone server. It has, unless you tell me that there's really only one server, one and only one server, it has everything. In this situation right now, I mean, in the industry right now, we know that there are a lot of servers everywhere, and remember that they are related and integrated. There is always a possibility that a mistake or an error or a vulnerability in one server could traverse into that server, which you're saying is stable. So yeah, that is my thought on that particular question.
Thank you so much, Irene. The next question which we have is, what's the main approach that you use in terms of translating the vulnerabilities reported from a penetration testing to a business risk?
Okay, very good question. What is my approach in translating the VAPT report to a management report, right? Richa?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Vulnerability reporting for a business penetration to a business risk.
Yes, yes, so very, very interesting, and I'm really happy that I'm happy that this question came. You know, one of the challenges when it comes to cybersecurity risk management is that how you are going to present it to the board. You know, the board, they do not talk our language. I mean, they don't talk our technical language. When you present to the board, you don't tell them that I have 100 vulnerabilities which are critical because they could impact the this particular application, the confidentiality. If you're going to use these terms to the board, most probably they will not listen to you. However, if you're going to present to the board that you have this much vulnerabilities, they are affecting our critical assets, our crown jewels. And if this is not addressed, this is the cost to the organization. If you remember the case of the Uber, right? What happened to Uber? They tried to hide the hack. Apart from paying $100,000 to the hackers, they were also penalized $148 million dollars. So how am I going to present it? I have the VAPT. Of course, it's not only the VAPT report that I will use to present to the board. I also have other risk assessment, process, assessing against ISO 27001, for example, or maybe assessing against HIPAA or PCI DSS. All of this will have to be combined in management report such that what they will see is the cost of the impact if we will not address the issues. It is also known. I haven't seen the latest uh, report or percentage of the organization's budget or allocation for information security. Sometimes they say, oh, your vulnerability management solution is so expensive, or your SIEM is so expensive, can we survive without it? Your anti-malware is so expensive, can we survive without it? So you should be ready how to answer these kinds of questions by being prepared in terms of telling them what would it cost the company if you are breached or there is a hack. Not only financial, how much it would cost to you financially, and how much it would mean to you if your reputation is damaged. So this is how you will present it. Don't tell the management, don't tell the board that you have 100 critical vulnerabilities. You need to buy this because you have 100 critical vulnerabilities. No, you don't present it that way. Yep.
Thank you so much for answering that, Irene. The next question which we have is how cyber risk management aspect could be reshaped for or due to COVID situation?
Ooh. How can cyber risk management can be reshaped
Yes.
because of the COVID? Okay, another interesting question. In fact, the enterprise risk divisions and not only the information security risk management or the GRC team looked into that at that time. Last year, as early as the first quarter of the year, the phishing attacks doubled or tripled. Okay, why? Because they've seen the vulnerabilities in the people. There are a lot of phishing emails that says information about COVID. So therefore, what is in the mind of the people at that time is about awareness. People were hungry for the information about COVID. Is this a fake news, or is it really happening? So phishing attack is the one that really spiraled in the first and second quarter. But when the second quarter came in, not only about in the well-being, of course, taking care of the well-being of the employees or everyone in the organization, but also taking care of the environment itself. For the environment, let's say health and safety, their risk management approach is to make sure that everything is sanitized, sterilized. If you don't need to be here, you don't need to be here. If you need to be here, you need to be social distance. Okay, this is how they approach the risk at that time. Now, when it comes to IT or cybersecurity, it's only the phishing attacks is only one of the threats, the biggest threats that we looked at that moment. We have to look also at how we are addressing the remote access because of the work from home. Everybody went working from home. So that's the second option that you have to look into. Number three, if you are a hospital, what is critical to the hospital as far as the COVID is concerned? Securing the data and the information of the patients. Which hospital would want their information about the COVID patients being released in the public? No one, okay? The second is other institutions, for example, let's say in the education sector, universities. The universities, they participated in the research and the development of the COVID vaccine. So there are a lot of researchers. Really, everyone is trying to find a vaccine for the COVID. Therefore, the universities are also a possible target for attacks. I'd say that sometime in June, I've already mentioned that in one of the conferences that universities, what are their crown jewels at that time, at that particular period of the COVID? It is their crown jewels are the research that they are doing. So they have to secure it. And then sometime in August or September, we already heard that there's a Russia attack on one of the researches being done by a university. So it happens. A very good question, because the moment you know that how should you reapproach the risk management in terms of the pandemic, It means you are aware that you should change your approach and you need to know what to prioritize. Depending on your type of entity or organization, you have to revisit, you have to review, you have to observe. For example, I have a risk register. I have a list of possible threats. Did I see the pandemic in my list of threats? No. Or for example, even if I put it there, maybe I could have put it as almost no, it will not happen at all. Remember the proximity. It may not happen at all, but who knows? It happened. No one knows. No one's ready for that. But if you're really active in doing your risk management, as early as January 2020, and you have entered a pandemic and one of the possible threats, you could have already triggered that is starting to happen. If it is one at that time, you could have elevated it to two, to three, and by the time in March, when there's a lot of lockdown already, you could have put it already at a five, very high risk. So a very interesting question. Really, I appreciate that question. I can just say that the person who had asked that is aware that the risk management is not a stable management process. It evolves, it changes depending on the situation, depending on the organization, depending on the industry. Thank you. I'm sorry. It was a very long answer, but it's really a very interesting question.
Thank you so much. It was really informative. Uh, so we'll take the last question for this webinar. So how can we link cybersec awareness and risk management?
Okay, cyber sec awareness and risk management. In risk management, there are weaknesses or vulnerabilities in people. You can have a category there, people. Now, when you say people, one of the things that organizations are missing are the proper training and awareness. That's why we always say humans are the weakest link. Regardless, I always say that not only the administrators, let us not only blame it to the standard employees. We say they are not techie, that's why they are not compliant. No, even the techie people, they can also cause, they can also be a threat. Again, just look at the over engineers. They let their accounts hanging out there. They were compromised by the hackers. So how will I link the risk management with the training and awareness? As soon as I see that there is a huge errors or issues or incidents related to human error, that's the more that I will strengthen my training and awareness. This is the more that I would need to coordinate with the HR training department to make sure that there is a certain, at least let us set a target. If it is a very high error or incidents caused by human error, I would say that my target with HR department, let us do a training and awareness at least 95% of the organization. If it is a low incident of human error, then maybe I can agree with the HR training and department, at least 50%, the usual training and awareness. And regular advisory, even emails will do. Just send a regular advisory to the users so that they are aware that you have a security awareness in place. It is not always a one-to-one, it's not always a webinar. Simple emails would mean a lot of help.
Great. Thank you, Irene, again for such a wonderful presentation and answering those questions. It was pleasure to have you with us. And so this concludes the webinar. Thank you all for attending and hope you have learned and enjoyed this presentation. Now you all can end the webinar. Thank you so
Thank you.
much, Irene, for having you
Thank
with
you
us.
very much to all as well, and I appreciate the participation of everyone. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much, Irene. Bye bye.